Good Sabbath morning to you, and let me share with you something interesting. Daniel 10:13. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 1 and 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Then go to verse 20. Then he said, Knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Greece shall come. Now, many have argued, and nobody really knows who the prince of Persia is here. Many say it's an angel, a spiritual being. But let's assume, we take this literally, that this messenger sent from God in order to come to Daniel to give him an understanding about a vision that he had, was a messenger who was playing a role in prophecy, and he, on his way, was actually fulfilling much of what Daniel was seeing in his vision, which would explain the 21-day delay. 21 in the Bible is a number for a fulfillment, a completion. It's like a coming together of many things. And so it's very possible that this Prince of Persia, you see, we think there's a big battle going on. And there is. But warfare in the spiritual realm is very different than warfare in the natural. You know, there's not angels up there with swords slashing each other. I mean, what happens? Are they going to wound them and send them to the angel hospital to recover? Do the angels die in battle? You know, these are spiritual beings. You know, like Frank Peretti, do they just disappear when they're struck with a sword? What happens in the battle? Warfare is very different in the spiritual realm. There's only one source of power in warfare, because God's in control. He created the whole universe. How can, you know, the devil hope to overthrow God? I mean, he's not that dumb, unless, you know, he's like in that novel, The Mouse That Roared, a little town, you know, little nation of Grand Fenwick, but their 13 warriors come to attack the United States in order to lose so that they can get foreign aid from the United States, but then end up discovering a Q-bomb, doomsday bomb, and they end up winning the war. A satirical novel, funny, and it's about as ridiculous as the enemy, Satan, believing that he can conquer God. He doesn't hold such aspirations. What he does want to do is create such diversion as to mess up God's plans, where God has to rework his plans, or more than likely it's to draw people into his, you know, draw people away from God. That's his whole purpose. Well, what does he battle with? What is this war on? The only thing that God does not control, and this he set up by his own laws, his own will, is man's will. He does not control the will of the human being. He set this up as a law, and he will not break that law. Therefore, we have a choice. The only thing he can do is influence us, and that's puts the enemy, Satan, on a level playing field to create an influence. So I personally believe, and this is my own personal position, and I could be wrong. I am not a prophet. I am not a watchman. I am just a student of the Bible. I have my Ph.D. in biblical archaeology. I've studied archaeology. I've studied ancient history. I've taught it. And so that's all I got to work with. I need to stay within my specific genre here. So I am not a prophet. But what I want to do is share with you something that is quite, it's uncanny how it works out. And I would like you to, after I finish this, to click whether you like it or not, and that's going to determine whether I follow through with this or not. I do have a manuscript. I've talked to my publisher. He's very interested in publishing it. I haven't decided yet whether to send it to him or not. In that manuscript, I am predicting who the next president will be, what will happen to the United States, not because of a revelation from God, but purely my own study of Scripture and ancient history. I am following what quantum physics call like a time loop. In a time loop, time is like a corkscrew, and it keeps spinning around and repeating itself. And I find much of what happens in the Old Testament is repeated throughout history. It follows the same pattern, follows the same lines. As, you know, the old saying goes, if you don't study history or if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's what we do. We repeat history. And I see history, you know, from my own view. Again, I'm not a prophet. From my own view, I see history repeating itself in the form of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire, of course, was the great benefactors to Israel, just as the United States is to Israel. The United States was really mainly responsible for Israel becoming a nation. They were at the forefront of it, helping establish Israel as a nation, just as the Persian Empire was there to help the Jewish people return to Israel. And I think we're following pretty much the same pattern. So I want to take you on a little journey through the history of the Persian Empire, starting with 3 years before Daniel had his vision. First, the Persian Empire, Achaemenid Empire, known as the First Persian Empire, existed for 550 to 330 BC, 220 years. We have 220 years that the Persian Empire existed. The United States has existed now, well, from 1776 to 1996, 220 years. It's been, in 2021, it will be 25 years after, and the United States will have existed for 256 years. Or was it? In 25 years, it'll be 2021. 25 is a biblical number for grace upon grace. God extending grace and continuing that grace. So God would give a grace period to this country and then another period of grace of 25 years. I believe in 1996 was when President Clinton was elected president. The second time, that's when he entered into the impeachment proceedings. That year, the Supreme Court ruled that they could follow the trial. He wasn't immune from being convicted of the crimes that he was said to have committed. And Clinton was elected in 1996. The nation began praying, and I believe God gave a grace period of 25 years from that point. Clinton wasn't impeached. The country wasn't thrown into chaos. And when Clinton took office in 1997, February 28th of that same year, there was a massive earthquake destroying northern Iran, destroying the area of the old Babylon, killing 3,000 people. It was the area of the old Babylon. You know, we could take that as a sign that this is starting a trend following the prayer of Daniel here in Daniel 10:13. What was happening about the time of Daniel? Babylon fell in 539 BC to King Cyrus of the Persian Empire. His son Cambyses, his son, having a rough time this morning. Cambyses, the first or the second, became ruler over Babylon. He put him as a governor over Babylon. He was a prince who eventually became the king of Persia after his father Cyrus died. But he was ruling over the defeated Babylon. And 3 years into his rule, well, he only lasted 1 year. For some reason, King Cyrus removed him from office. But he stayed around Babylon during this time, planning his next moves. He was a prince of Persia. I think it's very possible that maybe this messenger from God was sent to influence. That's the only thing God can do, is influence you. He can't change your will, but he can do things to influence your will. And this puts him on a level playing field with the enemy, Satan, because Satan can do his influence as well. And so I believe that what was going on was a war of wills, a very bloody battle of wills, where the messenger of God was trying to influence Cambyses to make certain decisions, because the future of Israel depended on it, depended on the decisions he would make to fit the timeline, what was going on. So 3 years after the fall of Babylon, Cambyses was in Babylon, where Daniel most likely stayed as well. And this messenger was influencing him. He was delayed for 21 days. Now note how the wording of this goes. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. The word withstood in Hebrew basically means to hold, to be closed to stand against. He was resisting the influence such that the archangel Michael had to come and cause his influence as well to overcome the influence of Satan so that he could make the right decisions. Apparently he made the right decisions, because we find in verse 20 it says that after he finishes giving Daniel the understanding of what his vision was, that he would return to fight with the prince of Persia. And then from that point, he would go on to fight with the prince of Greece. In other words, Cambyses was going to be the next ruler of Persia. He would rule, and I'm not going to go in complete detail on that. I do in my manuscript. But he would rule to a certain point, and then he would be replaced by Darius. Let's run through a timeline that I set up here. So, 3 years after the conquest of Babylon, Daniel had his vision. Cambyses, the prince of Persia, He ruled Babylon for 9 months, then was removed from office by his father Cyrus. Cambyses is plotting his next move. 8 years later, in 530 BC, Cyrus dies in a campaign at the northeastern frontier, and Cambyses becomes the sole ruler of Persia. What was happening in the United States during this particular timeline? 220 years into the United States, President Clinton was elected, inaugurated, as I said, and then re-elected in 1996, where he went through a cloud of impeachment. In 1997 was when you had the earthquake in Babylon, or the old Babylon, where 3,000 people were killed in 1997, February 28th. And that would almost parallel the fall of Babylon. George Bush was elected president right about the 3 years period when Daniel had his vision, 3 years after the conquest of Babylon. 3 years later, Babylon was conquered. Then 8 years later, in 530 BC, Cyrus dies in a campaign. Cambyses becomes the sole ruler of Persia. And that would be 8 years later in the United States, would be 2008, when Obama takes office. Now, Cambyses was not a good man. I'm not saying Obama wasn't a good man, don't get me wrong there. But what he did was conquer Egypt, and that was his prized possession. But he wanted to maintain control of this conquered nation. One way to do it, he was going to take the major religion of Egypt back to Persia and make that the religion of Persia. This would have altered and totally ruined any plans that God had for getting, Israel back to their promised land. So he had to put a stop to this guy, because the goddess that he was worshiping was Night. The goddess Night was a very vicious, terrorizing goddess. She was a supreme goddess who was a goddess of war and child slavery, and would have really, turned the nation Persia away from God totally. As it was, Persia was leading towards a monotheistic belief, Zoroastrianism, and which had very strong parallels to worship of Jehovah, and made the kings very partial towards the beliefs of Israel, of the Hebrew people, because the similarities between their religions, and the kings, though not totally embracing God Jehovah, had something very close to it, and they were quite favorable to the Hebrews. Well, 8 years later, Cambyses is returning in 522 to Persia, bringing this religion. And what happens is his brother, actually, he, in a deathbed confession, Cambyses said that he had murdered his brother. And his brother was really the legal heir to the throne. And so some imposter, because the word didn't get out that, his brother was dead, that he was just off on some, campaign doing something or another. So some imposter came back and took the throne. Had a major coup, because, Cambyses was 8 years over there in Egypt plotting. And so an imposter posing as Bardia, his Cambyses' brother, told everybody, "Hey, I'm the legal heir to the throne. I am Bardia. Put me up as king." And everybody got around it. But then along comes some radicals, one by the name of Darius, who managed to prove that this birthright was not the right, question the birthright of this person, saying it's a fraud. And he managed to stage, so this imposter only ruled for a couple months, and he created a major coup, taking over the throne, which totally changed everything. Well, what happened 8 years later after Obama was elected president? Ran against Hillary Clinton, who thought she was the heir to the throne of the United States, and everybody thought so too, and they were convinced. And all of a sudden, along comes a man named Trump, who usurps the whole thing and just totally upsets the whole empire, but sets the stage for something else. So that brings us up to the year 2016. I don't want to go any further telling you what happened. Some of you probably have studied Persian history. You know what happens next. Eventually, after Darius rules ends, then along comes Xerxes, or Assyrius as he's known, who happened to be the new husband of Esther, and brings about the return of Israel to their homeland, to Palestine. But a lot took place after that 8 years when Darius took office. There was a lot of turmoil. In the next 4 years, there was tremendous turmoil. Darius was not the legal heir to the throne, and plots after plots to remove him and to undermine his kingdom, and he miraculously defeated them all. Well, now that brings us up to 2020. 2021 ends the 25-year grace period. The 25 years, the grace upon grace. What's going to happen in 2021? You want that book to be published? Because I don't know if I want to do it or not. I'm not a prophet. I'm stepping out of my genre. I'm only speculating, okay? It's pure speculation based on a loop, time loop theory, that history just repeats itself. And if history's repeating itself, we're in for something in 2021. And in the next few years after that. What? Well, I don't want to talk about that. Like I said, it's not my genre. So if you want me to go ahead and have this book published, my publisher says he's willing to publish it, after he reads it, of course. And he will have it out. He'll put a rush on it and get it out as soon as he can. And so I'm ready to send that manuscript to him the day after Labor Day. If, I can just feel right about it. And share this with, maybe the book won't sell. I don't know. Who knows why a book sells. But even get it out there, I pretty much have the same people listening to me every day here. So if you'd like to see that book in print, if you think I'm not stepping out of my genre, then hit the like button. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. I just need a little guidance. I'm really praying about this. I'm really seeking the face of God because I don't want to publish the book. I don't want to come across like a prophet. I don't want to come across as, I never wanted to predict the future or anything like that. And I'm not. Believe me, I'm not predicting the future. I'm just giving a little bit of history lessons, based on my, fact that, I have studied this. I have, like I said, my PhD is in biblical archaeology of the Middle East and ancient study. I've studied these ancient times, and I just see a parallel, and to me, it's just giving out a history book, but I don't want to send out a kind of a history book unless, for fear, it's, I don't know. So click on the like button, share this with others, and comment and let me know what you think I should do. You want to hear the rest of this story after 2021? You want to hear who I think the Bible's talking about is going to be the next president, who's going to win the next election? Let me know. And like I said, it's not a prophecy. It's simply just looking at a time loop, a repeat of history. So thank you for listening. And what I do is I'm just remembering that I'm in the presence of God as I share these things, and I want to do it as doing it unto God.